It's good to be back, but more accurately, it's weird to be back. What I've felt like preparing this is I feel as though I'm like a boxer that's come out of retirement for one last bout. So I'm going to be talking about gender issues tonight, and well, when I say gender issues, I mean gender issues as they affected me. But already I'm kind of a bit tense about dealing with this sort of subject, because for a white male middle-aged bloke, say middle-aged, these subjects are always a little bit tricky, and I can feel the thin ice on me bending as we speak. So what I want to say is, if anyone gets the urge at any point to storm out, please take your personal items with you. So, let's kick off with the Prezi. Right, well, the first thing I want to say is that every single word in this title is a lie. Yeah, all I wrote this for was comic effect. There was no sex war that I ever witnessed. Yeah, I never saw any of my colleagues as enemies, and what's more, I tried to get away with doing as little work as possible. So all of this is a pack of lies. Now, we've just been through some of that Athena Swan business. Let's just refresh your memory again. Women inside. As soon as I saw that, I thought, what on earth have you let yourself in for here? Not just that, why the hell have they asked you? You know, they've suckered you into a trap. But the second formulation of the same thing, as was just said, it broadens things out. Gender equality more broadly, and not just factors, barriers that affect women. So it's broadened things out a little bit. I can see a bit of wiggle room, still on dangerous territory. So this is the email I got asking me to do this. Audience would welcome an elaboration of any intermingled personal, professional and political. Right? The key words there that I'm picking out are intermingled personal. Yeah? That is to say, mishmash of memories and anything that relates to you. Yeah? Professional and political. So, firstly, don't expect a settled line of argument throughout all of this. What there's going to be is a random, rambling collection of memories and of insights, not one of which is going to be backed up by any form of evidence. So let's go. Politics, first hand. You were wrong. 1979, not 1975. This is when I started my nurse training. Let's get the political bits out of it first off. I started in October 1979 in nursing, and these were the two events, I think, which framed the start and the end of my nurse training. There was that at the start, and there was that at the end. Now, at the time, we lived just round the corner. This is a picture of the Rialto in Parliament Street, still on fire, yeah, and our flat was there. So we had a grandstand view of the Toxteth riots as they were happening. In fact, I got tear gassed, yeah, which is a novel experience, you've got to admit. So, this is, I was brought up, raised and educated in Kirby, and this was the school that I went to. Opened in 1966 by the Prime Minister, Harold Wilson. Yeah, this was a brand new, out-the-box school for 2,300 lads. Yeah, this school had everything you could reasonably want in a secondary school. It had a swimming pool, it had tennis courts, it had laboratories, it had workshops, the lot. I knew someone who went to a really expensive private school, And he said that their school had nothing compared to what our school had. Yeah? 2,300 lads, every modern convenience. In my year, in 2003, of my year, 2 lads went to university. Yeah? That's not a lot, is it? Other lads went to teacher training college, fair enough. Yeah, but only 2 lads, and I was one of them, went to university. But the figures like that, I think they sound worse than what they actually were at the time. At the time, only 5% of the population went to university anyway. And if you think about it, some parts of the country had take-up rates of university places at like 100% or 80%. So in a place like Kirby, that's going to really bring the averages down, isn't it? So 2 out of however many it was in my year, it sounds bad, but yeah. And the other thing, is, you know, the lads in my school, and there's a couple here tonight, but the lads in my school, they didn't feel as though they were brutally denied university education. No, absolutely not. They regarded the ones the 2 who went to university as mugs. Yeah, even though they were going to get paid for at university, get the fees paid and get a maintenance grant, they regarded this as volunteering for poverty. This was the period in the early 70s where you could leave school and within 6 months be earning more than the teachers who were still working in the school. You know, kids I knew had cars. So the notion that you were going to volunteer for duffel-coated penury for 3 years, learning some rubbish subject, it wasn't that boys in my cohort felt deprived. It was more like, you're an idiot. From the age of about 12, the only ambition I ever had in life, and really the only ambition I've ever had since, the only ambition I ever had in life was to be a university student. I'd watched the telly. I'd seen all the kickoffs going on in Paris, May 1968. I'd seen the occupations of our colleges up and down the country. I'd read the news of the world. As far as I was concerned, every person in university was either rioting, smoking pot, or taking the pill. Probably all 3 at once, yeah? And as a 13, 14-year-old boy, I thought, that's the life for me. Apprenticeship, you must be mad, yeah? Because all I could see was, I'll have my own flat, I'll be away from my mum and dad, and away from Kirby, what's not to like? So I showed up. Well, this was a formative experience for me, really, because although I say that about, like, you know, the poor uptake of university or higher education among my cohort, although I say that, there was also a woeful lack of ambition in the school. Here's my big example. This was all I wanted to do at school. I wanted to get out of Kirby and go to university, right? So we go along to me, my mum and my dad. My mum and dad showed up to every parents' meeting ever, yeah? And we showed up at this careers meeting. And the teacher said, oh, yeah, okay, fair enough. Yeah, well, you're doing O-levels, yeah? What do you want to do ultimately? I want to go to university. And he went, he said, well, we'll tell you what. Do your O-levels first and let's see, yeah? And I thought, you cheeky get. I've just told you what I'm doing, right? And you're telling me we'll see. I don't think so, mate. And I've kind of borne a grudge. There's a few teachers I've borne a grudge with down the years. And I've borne a grudge with this fella ever since. But it only occurred to me while I was writing this. He probably hadn't been to university himself. So he probably thought, this little upstart, you know what I mean? Who do you think you are with your university ways? But I kind of never forgot it. And it was, in a way, it was motivating because I thought, well, stuff you, mate, I'm off. And sometimes I wonder whether ending up as a nurse, wasn't in some way a reaction to what you might call the hypermasculinity of a single-sex boys' school in rough and tough Kirby, yeah? And it was hypermasculine. But that said, when I look back on my school career, the signs were early on that something was up, yeah, with my kind of with my school life. Number one, couldn't stand woodwork, yeah. Some kid, so they used to give you what they called jobs, and so you'd have this little thing to do, you know, it was like spice rack or something like that. And some kid was off with TB, something that really took a long time to treat, you know what I mean? And when he come back after 3 or 4 months, he was still ahead of me, because I just had absolutely no enthusiasm for the subject whatsoever. Hated woodwork, hated metalwork, but especially hated games, yeah? I absolutely hated games. The smell of rubber and sweat in the gym, you know, the mud and the cold, the pointlessness of it. Yay, we just scored. Oh yeah, that's great. That makes standing in the rain in my shorts entirely worthwhile, you know. And I wasn't going to say this. If there were other people from the rest of the university here, but seeing as I know all you lot anyway, what especially I couldn't stand. What especially I couldn't stand was the changing rooms, you know what I mean? And there'd always be one of the more well-developed 13 and 14-year-olds, and they'd be on the benches, and you know, getting dried out the shower like that. Oh dear God! Yeah, I couldn't stand it. So in school, I only ever played one game of rugby, right? And for that game of rugby, I spent the entire game running away from the ball. And the reason for that was, if you went near the ball, very, very bad things happened, you know. So basically, for the vast majority of my school career, I was what was known as a non-kitter, yeah? And non-kitters had about the status in school of conscientious objectors in the First World War. You know what I mean? You weren't kind of... And I saw myself as being the opposite end of the masculinity spectrum, yeah, to the sporty types. The other end of the spectrum. How I saw myself was rather as an aesthete, yeah, a sensitive type, the sort of boy who cries, he knows not why. That type of character. Not grunting and groaning, running after a stupid ball on the pitch. Anyway, get off your high horse there, Jonesy. So, off to the University College North Wales in Bangor for 3 years of studying philosophy. And university was absolutely everything that I expected and more. Yeah, didn't let down. In fact, I would say that I've never quite got over leaving university. And every October, I get this sort of urge to go back to college. But first of all, co-education came as a bit of a shock. But also, another thing that came as a bit of a shock was and I suppose this is a class thing too. You'd go upstairs to a university, to a lecture theatre, yeah? And down in the hall at the bottom, there was coat racks, and people would leave their coats there and go to the lecture. And it took me months. It took me months to get over this, you know. Don't they nick your coat? Or just do horrible things to it, you know. It took me 2 or 3 months to get over the fact that walking through the college, some older person wasn't going to come up to me and says, "Where should you be now?" So, after university, the one thing I was absolutely certain about was I wasn't going back to Kirby because the cultural offer in Kirby was still, shall we say, limited. So went to live in Bristol. My sister was studying at Bristol University. There was, job opportunities down there. It was going to be a laugh. Let's go to Bristol. Nice place. So me and him went to Bristol. And my first job in the National Health Service was there. The Bristol Royal Hospital for Sick Children. And my first job in the morning as a porter, was to take matron her tea. Yeah, so it was a proper teapot with a proper china cup and all that. Yeah, to take it to matron's office, which was there. Yeah, and it'd be a cup of tea and a daily paper. Inevitably, the Daily Telegraph. Yeah, a short-haired woman, rather stocky, very sensible shoes. Yeah, and that was her office. Yeah. Now you can see from the positioning of her office, with a moderately priced machine gun, she could dominate the entire front flank of the hospital. I never got to know her particularly well because, but this was my desk. You can find all these photographs on the internet. It's absolutely phenomenal. Here was the desk. I was the public face of this hospital, right? People would come into the children's hospital and this would be the mug that they would see. And there's my desk. It didn't look like that then, I've got to say. We did get a brush out every now and again, but that was the Porter's Lodge in the children's hospital. So when I first lived in Bristol, I shared a house with a woman called Sally, who was a member of the radical. Are there any midwives in? Oh, P's and Q's then, P's and Q's. I shared a house with a woman called Sally, who was a member of the radical midwives group. And I used to look at this woman, Sally, and, you could tell it radiated from her. She loved her job, yeah? It was a job that gave her meaning in life. It was high public esteem. She could go and work in practically any country that she wanted, And I'm guessing, looking back, that this kind of influenced my thinking later on. But as a hospital porter, working nights, I used to socialise with the night sisters. Again, another group of very notable women, really strong women who spent nights looking after sick kids in hospital. They were inspiring in a way. But by 1979, now I was married, and I wanted to come back to Liverpool. I'd had enough now, I want to come back. Mum and Dad are in Liverpool, friends are up here. But there was, in 1979, big problem with coming back to Liverpool. Big problem. Not that problem, but that problem. Now, the effects of my 1979 slide earlier on with Margaret, now the effects of this were starting to bite. There were mass layoffs. That was a huge, big shed of a building that was built quickly because they had to take in thousands of people that were being laid off all over the city. Yeah, week in, week out, there were mass redundancies in the city, and the city was finding it difficult to cope, frankly. So how to get back to Liverpool with a job? Well, one thing's for sure, there is always a recruitment crisis in nursing. Yeah, I'd seen adverts for all sorts of different types of nurses in magazines and stuff like that, and I thought, well, number one, it's a way back to the city. Number two, it's an intellectually stimulating job. Number three, you can travel with it. Number four, you're a bit of use to your family if things start going wrong with them. It's a job which is well regarded. And there's variety in it. There's variety in it. So I started to think in terms of, why not? Why not bite the bullet and train to be a nurse? Apart from anything else, It's an apprenticeship. It gives you a manual skill that nobody can ever take away from you. You know, kindly note, none of the reasons I've just offered you for taking up nursing had anything to do with anything as soppy as helping the sick. It was all instrumental, getting back to Liverpool. That was the key issue, right? So me, armed with my 2-1 degree in philosophy, put an application in to the Royal Liverpool. Now that must have been pretty unusual at the time, looking back, you know. There was hardly any nurses who had degrees then. So what they made of my application form, I can't even imagine. All I had to do now, right, was to come home and say to me mum and dad, Peter and Mater, I'm about to take on a girl's job that I could have took up after school without pestering you for university. But in fairness, my mum and dad were a breeze. They never opposed it in any meaningful sense at all. Largely because in the family there was a dedication to education, and not education to get a job. Education was seen as liberation in its own right. You know, that learning is always good for your personality and your character. You know, so to say I'm going to train to be a nurse, this was kind of good news, really. But on the other hand, it must have still been a bit weird for him. I'm going to show you a photograph from 2012. Yeah, this is on the BBC, 2012. Some fella is thinking of becoming a nurse. And you know, this is kind of modern. What the hell they thought in 1979? That must have been kind of tricky for them to work out, really. And especially given the fact that my dad was a very sort of masculine bloke. He spent his entire life my dad was an archetypal 1970s Northern industrial militant trade unionist. Yeah, he'd spent his entire life going around organising building workers on building sites to demand such extreme things as helmets on building sites and toilets on building sites, that sort of thing. But that's how he'd spent his entire working life. So I did wonder about it, how he was going to take you. There's his obituary in the Morning Star, full page of obituary. That's how sort of up to his neck he was in all of this. But the relevance of nurse training kind of came home, and the relevance and the utility of nurse training kind of came home very quickly. My dad one day said, "Hey son, second year student nurse, coming to the end of my second year." My dad said, "Son, there's a march, the TUC are organising a march, and it's going to go from Liverpool to London. They're looking for someone to do the first aid. Would you do it?" Yeah. So for the 4 weeks that it took, I spent 3 weeks walking from Liverpool to London, looking after the first aid. And you know, by now I was a militant atheist. I was raised in a Roman Catholic school, fair enough. But by now I was a militant atheist. But there was enough Catholic in me to think, yeah, you're going down to London there, bathing feet of the poor. That's got to be good in some way. So yeah, I walked the three of the 4 weeks down to London, and that's how I got my first ever publication. This was in the Nursing Mirror, second year student. The boss of the school that I was in, I missed 2 days of block. I wasn't legging back for stupid block when I was down in London doing this, which is kind of the most educational thing I ever did. So I missed 2 days, and I was dragged into the office when I got back. And he was quite friendly about it. Uncle Bob was quite friendly about it, really, but he did make it clear that this was a disciplined profession you were entering, and you couldn't just skip off when you fancied it. So, life as a student nurse, as a bloke. 23 female nurses and me. And they made me ask all the questions in class, and they made me participate in all the discussions. And if we were surrounded, if let's say we were around a bed and the teacher was telling us something, and he said, any questions, yeah? Someone, I'd get a hand in the back, ask a question, you. Right. Liz was my best friend in the nun, militant atheist. The nun was my best friend in the group, yeah? In the mid-1980s, she went off to Ethiopia during the famine crisis. That must have been tough, eh? You know, that must have been real. She was only qualified a couple of years and then gets shipped off right out there. She became a really senior management manager in Warrington. Who else? She became a ward sister up in the intensive care unit at Southport Hospital. She organised outreach service, cardiac outreach services into the community from the Liverpool Heart and Chest Hospital. I don't know what happened to the rest, but even the selection that I do know what happened. You know, these went on to do real good stuff in the health service. Major prize for the person looking at that photograph who can say who was in charge. It's Uncle Bob, innit? You know what I mean? He kind of stands out a little bit. Was I ever that thin? So, this is a book of lectures that was written in 1878 by James Long. And this was a surgeon who used to lecture the nurses in the first purpose-built school of nursing outside of London. Yeah, and that was in 1862 that the school was founded. This is 1878. So we're looking at pretty much the sort of ideology that drove the profession in the earliest days. Mr. James Long. Advice, this was in the introduction. You must look upon yourselves not as our servants, but as fellow workers with us. You are in fact students, as we all are. The difference between you and us is that we are more advanced, have received a different form of education, and have had our minds more cultivated in a particular direction than you have. Yeah? But he's very keen to point out that nursing is the special province of women, and women have a natural tendency to it. It kind of leaves your male student nurse out of the... in fact, you couldn't train as a male student nurse then. In fact, I've been looking at the history of Walton Hospital recently, and Walton Hospital was one of the first hospitals in the country to take male nurses on. And in 1935, they really pushed the boat out with modern thinking in that they allowed male nurses and female nurses to get their lectures in the same room. How times have changed. But everyone's got an opinion about nurse education. For those of you who work in nurse education, you must have noticed this by now. Everyone's got an opinion about what should be in a nursing curriculum. And it's odd. Nobody ever says, yeah, you know what architects should have? They should do more box girder bridges. No one ever says that sort of thing. But for nurse education, everyone feels as though they've got a shout. If you want to get a cheap clap, on question time, yeah, when a health service story comes up, just say the words, yeah, and they should bring back matron. And people who have no idea what matrons did will automatically start clapping their hands off. Like it's some sort of return to some... nurses. She wrote this as a result of seeing nurses come to her house during the death of her husband, Nigella Lawson. And fair enough, I suppose you're entitled to an opinion about, how the care's gone on and all that. But her point was get nurses out of higher education. That was the whole thrust of this. Why do nurses need to do all this boot learning when it's a fairly simple job that anyone could do? And the thing that really got a goat was research. And the thing that strikes me as odd about that is, well, if that's the case, Nigella, why do you need a medieval and modern languages degree from Oxford to cook dinners? Do you know what I mean? But it's a theme that runs through this type of thinking. And it's this: I get just the right amount of education, but you get way too much. And there are other people who push this sort of line, people who you'd think would know better. This is the editor of The Lancet, Richard Horton. Under the right thinking and well-meaning guise of professionalising nurses and turning their work into a science akin to medicine, we risk displacing plain and simple and decidedly not non-scientific caring. Nurses do not need the epithet of specialist practitioner or assistant to dignify their work. Nobody asked you, mate. And not only that, plain and simple. Running a renal unit is plain and simple. Running an intensive care unit or a coronary care unit. I hope, Mr. Horton, that if you get chest pain, you don't end up at hospital with a nurse who's got nothing in her head except a kindly disposition. I hope it's someone who kind of knows their stuff, complicated stuff. And this idea that if you educate women too much, that they become unfit for purpose, it's an idea that's old as the hills. This is a quote I picked up from a Scottish academic. She's talking about women getting into medical schools. Yeah, very late, by the way. Medical women had to counter objections voiced by a number of opponents of all higher education for women, that it would develop their brains to the detriment of their reproductive organs and leave them unfit for marriage or motherhood. And this idea still kind of kicks around. So, there I am. I've decided to become a nurse. I'm one of 23 with my philosophy degree. We had a debate, right? We had a debate, and the debate was around a woman's right to choose pregnancies. Yeah, a woman's right to choose. I supported the proposition in defence of the Abortion Act. Yeah, and someone else opposed it. But me, with my university education and my dissertation in moral philosophy, yeah, achieved a score of 23-1, and I was the only one voting for myself. I got absolutely hammered. I was talking before about, I did feel as though this was difficult to come home and say, I'm going to do this job, and it's kind of... The relevance became clear with the People's Market for Jobs, that this was going to be a skill I could use, but boy, oh boy, it came in useful later on. My dad had bad health towards the end of his life, and one of the events that took place was that he needed emergency bypass grafting, cardiac bypass grafting, so he goes off to the unit that I used to be a charge nurse on before I worked there, and it was only 2 years after they were all my mates, yeah. So they knew who I was, they knew who he was, yeah. So there was a sort of kind of friendly reception in the place. And I remember looking at standing at the end of the bed and looking at the charts, and I noticed that there was absolutely nothing on those charts that was done specially because I knew the only difference between what they did for me dad, yeah, and knowing that I was an ex-member of staff, the only difference was me and the rest of the family got staff cups. They didn't give us the National Health Cups. They kind of, but apart from that, you know, everything was exactly this, which is exactly what you'd expect, what you'd hope, isn't it? Yeah, but it still struck me. And later on, my dad developed Parkinson's disease, and towards the end of his life, you know, people become rather dependent, and there were occasions where, you know, personal, kind of intimate things had to be done for him. And it came as an enormous comfort to me and an enormous comfort to me dad, I think, the knowledge that I'd seen all this hundreds and hundreds of times before. This was nothing unusual to me, you know. And yeah, it was a real comfort, and I thought, yeah, this is why I took this up, you know, to be a bit of use like this was kind of one of the main things that made me go for it. So, one bloke, 23 women. I couldn't believe how hard nurse training was. I'd been used, to the extent that I'd studied before, I'd been used to 12 hours worth of lectures a week and then basically do what you want. Yeah, 12 hours of lectures, yeah, mess around. Yeah, whereas for nurse training, on the other hand, 40 hours worth of work, and we're talking serious work, we're talking about hulking 15-stone men around beds for 8 hours a day. 40 hours of work like that, and then after that, that's when you get your books out. You know, this was a real slog of a study, a period of study in my life. And the thing that struck me about that was it always struck me as unfair that someone who dossed through 3 years at university could look down on someone who had a nursing qualification as some sort of intellectually inferior qualification. Right. This, when I first mentioned to people the idea that I was going to be a nurse, or even that I was a practicing nurse, this would be a very common reaction. I mean, sometimes this reaction could be summarized down to a gesture. Yeah, I'm thinking of training to be a nurse. Oh, are you? That was not an uncommon reaction at all. And in fact, this was one of the things that I thought was kind of really could be a stumbling block. Would I be able to hack this? Yeah. But within the first couple of months of being on the wards, I realized something, you know, extraordinarily important about the whole nature of nursing and what I'd let myself in for. And it was this: the distasteful elements of being a nurse, the dirty bits, yeah, they're actually the easy bit. That you get used to that in no time at all. The thing that gets really hard is all the rest of the stuff that goes around it. You know, there was Frank, 75 years old. He's been healthy up to about 4 weeks ago, and now he's being exposed to all the indignities of the dying process. Yeah, this has hit him like a train. He's now in hospital. His wife's outside, and something unpleasant has happened in the bed. Yeah, and the thing that separates Frank in this position, with his wife worried outside, the thing that separates this situation from him sitting up in bed, proud, protected from all that, with his wife reassured, is what you do with Glennis in the next 10 minutes. Yeah, that makes it real. You know, the kind of distasteful elements of it kind of fade into nothingness. I was astonished how easy all that was. But when I was out of it, and back when I was working here, one of the jobs we used to have, one of the things that was expected of us, was that we would have to go for a couple of weeks back on the tools. Yeah. So one time I went to Wiston Hospital, where I was on the intensive care unit at Wiston Hospital, and the story ran that this poor girl, 15, this poor girl had been out at a party and she'd been foolish enough to get in the car with two lads who were drunk. Yeah. Now they're driving around with steep seat belts on. Yeah. But they lost control of the car, they hit a lamppost, and she just catapulted from the back seat out, bashed her head, and now they'd had her for a few days on the intensive care unit, and they knew nothing was going to happen with this girl. So they had the family in, some poor as church mouse family, and they were explaining to her that her brainstem had been damaged, and that was it. She was never coming back. So we are intending to turn the ventilator off soon, and she'd be dead within 30 minutes. Yeah. So this is going on. I'm there as the visitor, kind of trying to stay out, trying to be invisible, basically. And I looked down. I made the mistake of looking down, and her foot was sticking out from the bottom of the bed. Yeah. And on her foot, I could see all her toenails had been painted a different colour. See, I mean, such a remarkably 15-year-old girl thing to do. And looking at that, I thought, dear God, I'm going to lose it here. Yeah, because I was soft. My paws were soft at this stage. I'd been out of it for years. Yeah, so I had to get out. Excuse me, I need to go and use the phone. Yeah, nothing happened. I didn't let go or anything like that. I was just out the room. But it occurred to me to think, well, at one time, I could have taken this completely in my stride. You know, this would have been like a normal day's work. And it brought me to wonder, what does the exposure to that level of human tragedy and human misery, what is the cost to you? How does that affect you? What does it take out of you? And of course, we know the answer to that story, don't we? We all know the answer to that story, and it's this. None of your families, you nurses, none of your families think that you give them any friggin' sympathy when they're sick. My family say that the only way to get any sympathy off him is if you are already on a ventilator. Right? Oh, don't go. But I wonder what the cost is. It doesn't appear to be a cost. I don't see people being especially callous as a result of all of this, but just your ability to handle it. But on the other hand, different aspect of the same story. There you are, crammed in with people in these circumstances. Yeah. And boy, oh boy, do you get to know the characters of the other nurses you work with. You're on at 2 o'clock, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, Mr. So-and-so is going downhill fast, someone's got to ring the relatives, yeah? And it's your stinky, lousy job to go and ring them up and say, look, there's been a deterioration in your dad's condition, could you please come in? Not a nice call to make at all, right? But there you are, the family show up and they're in bits and you're dealing with stuff in the room and all that stuff. And boy, that makes you bond with your oppo. Because you're seeing people in a very tight situation. And character shows through. I remember one time, I was a student nurse, third-year student nurse, something like that. I'm on a medical ward, and some fella comes in. His story is that he'd collapsed in the pub. Yeah, he'd collapsed in the pub. What it was in the end, he probably had some sort of massive stroke. But I was kind of overwhelmed by the tragedy of this. The idea that you could, among a group of strangers, get so sick, be taken to hospital, no one knew where he lived or anything like that, So his family didn't know. All they knew was that, Uncle Jim wasn't home early. Yeah. And here he was in hospital, and it looked like he was going to die in short order. So I'm there at the side of the bed, and I'm looking at this fella, kind of getting a bit choked. Yeah. Looking at him, thinking, what a disaster. And I'd zoned out, thinking about all of this. And from a distance, I could hear the staff nurse saying, well, I said to him anyway, I said, if that's what you think, well, we may as well not carry on with this relationship. And she was talking about something that was going on with her boyfriend. Yeah. So I'm like, God, you're supposed to be qualified. Aren't you in charge? Yeah. And then she dropped her bombshell. I thought that was bad enough. Yeah. But then she dropped her bombshell. Anyway, I've taken an overdose. So over the next hour, I thought, just ignore it. Just ignore it. She's probably blagging. So over the next hour, I watched her going down and down and down into this sort of Valium haze. And it was my wonderful job to take this qualified member of staff who I should have been relying on for guidance. I had to take her down to A&E in a chair while Sister looked after the ward. Unbelievable, unbelievable. Relationships with the nurses. The days, those of you nurses, you will remember those nights where the lights on the medical ward never actually got turned off. Why? Because some fella who came in, he seemed normal 2 days ago, but he hasn't had a bevy for 3 days, and he's starting to literally be chased by demons. And he's running around the ward. And meanwhile, you've got what amounts to a mutiny going on among the other staff, or among the other patients, saying, I thought you were supposed to come into hospital for a rest, while he's screeching his head off. Things people say. Let's get more water. The things people say to you. This one was such a regular thing that people said to you at dinner parties that I've developed a stock answer. What do you do for a living? I'm a nurse. What? A male nurse? And that was said so many times. I used to say, no, I go in drag. I remember another ward sister said to me once, no irony whatsoever. Can't emphasize that enough. She did not intend to be funny. She said, what are you doing next? Have you got a job when you qualify? No. She said, it'll all change, when you're a staff nurse. Yeah, she said, you can't just be one of the girls anymore. My kids stopped telling other kids in school what I did. Because my son said, they'd go, what does your dad do? He's a nurse. Nah. Do you mean a doctor? No, I mean a nurse. Nah, fellas can't be nurses. And he stopped trying to have the conversation. Okay, let's go into a different area of territory. If as a bloke you enter nursing, you have to recognise that you go into a profession that's kind of I don't want to use the word dominated, because there's no way women dominate men in nursing. It doesn't work like that. But you go into a profession which is populated by nursing, and you're a subset within the nursing population. But within the subset that you're in, yeah, there's another subset among blokes, and that is there's a real high incidence of gay blokes, right? And one of the things you have to get used to if you've gone into nursing is what do you do for a job? I'm a nurse. I wonder if he's gay. You can almost see the thought going across there. I was there at Aintree today, and I was talking to Vicky Hall, and she said, I didn't think any men became nurses. And she said, it was only the year that I realised that there were so many. And she went, and an awful lot of them are gay, aren't they? Well, yeah. I never met, in no other context in my life have I met so many gay fellas as I have in nursing. But I can't say that, getting changed in the same changing room, seeing people in difficult situations when, you've got to sort of pay attention and discipline and all that sort of stuff. There isn't a single instance I can think of where I had any problem, or anyone else I knew had any problem with a fella because of his gayness. I mean, lazy gay fellas, inconsiderate gay fellas, yeah, I had problems with that, but not as the result of their gayness. And, this informs other debates that are going on in society, doesn't it? You hear about gay men in sport or the military, and, I just think, oh, grow up. Never one problem, never a problem at all. Should have done this on separate sheets. Right. That was my first job in nursing, working in an operating theatre. I am still waiting for the knock on the door. Yeah, I'm still waiting for the knock on the door. The police officer saying, "Did you count the swabs in a cholecystectomy in 1983? Because your signature's on it. You come with me, sir." So one day I get called in the office and the boss says to me, "You're a nice fella, Chris, but I don't think you'll ever make a theatre nurse." Which, fair enough. I'd only been at it 2 years. If I can't pick it up by then. So next thing, I'm off to intensive care. Now, you see this photograph here? Well, what you've got to understand is, all round here, we were all stuffed in a corner getting our photograph taken, but all round here, there are intensive care patients. It's kind of inappropriate in a way. You know what I mean? We're all there having a kind of get-together. And there's other nurses who can't leave their patients because they're that sick. Yeah. So let's go through them. There are 2 university lecturers on this. That's one of them. Lovely of face and perfect in the attributes of grace. Then there's this character at the back. Anyone know Colin Jones from John Moore's? Colin went up the... I kind of stayed close to students. That was where I kind of felt I had the most contribution. I kind of stayed close to students. Colin went up the managerial road. I haven't seen him for a while. But great to work with. Really, really good bloke to work with. This is Audrey. Audrey ran the intensive care course over in Broad Green. She terrified the life out of us. Little tiny woman, yeah, wore the highest high heels you've ever seen in your entire life. This next to her is Barbara Dickens. Barbara was a major in the Territorial Army, and that's how she ran the intensive care unit. You were scared stiff of her. She's one of those people. She's one of those people who, when she comes on the ward, yeah, no matter what you were doing, everyone had... Because she was just that sort of intimidating character. She went on to become a very senior manager over in the Heart and Chest Hospital, Sandra Morrissey. This bloke at the back, he's got an interesting story. He came into the coffee room one time, scandalised, because Barbara trying to stretch her staff to cover every single day. He said, "You'd never guess what she's just said to me." "What's that?" She said, Would I cancel my holidays next week and get married on my days off?" But if we represent the glass ceiling, that it's the 2 fellas who ended up university lecturers. Yeah, again, not as bad as it looks. I tried to get these women to come and talk on my intensive care course when I was running one. Yeah, they would rather take a pistol to the head than get up in front of a group of people and talk. Yeah, so me and Colin went on to become university lecturers. The poorest paid person in the group is this fella here, and this was the most skilled bloke. You couldn't do anything without John Troy being one step ahead of you. If you needed a piece of equipment, you'd turn around to ask John to get it, and it'd be there already. And then as soon as it had finished, as soon as you'd finished with it, you'd turn round and it'd be gone. You know, he just knew where he's one of them. He knew where everyone was up to in the place and stayed one step ahead of anything. Now, among these women, there was a general consensus. By the way, I meant to say this before when I showed you the picture of the set. Yeah, here's something I could never understand from a gender perspective. Yeah, most of the nurses that I trained with, right from the word go, could not stand getting placed on a women's ward. They couldn't stand. Where are you next? Women's surgery. I never understood that because we never saw what it was that they might have been complaining about because we only ever went on men's wards. Yeah, the consensus view was that the blokes, when the blokes were in charge, we were more relaxed, not quite as relaxed as someone who it was alleged never proved. It was never proved that on nights he'd been caught peeing in a sink. Not that relaxed, yeah. But generally speaking, the word was the expression that used to get used about the blokes in charge was laid back, and it wasn't always used as a compliment. You know, there was kind of a hidden agenda that, in some way, slapdash. I think that's the. Right, what have we got to say on this? I remember one time I was watching Blind Date. Yeah. Blind Date. And there's a quantity surveyor and there's a buyer for Tesco's. Yeah. And Scylla says to the third fella, "What do you do?" Right? And he said, I'm a student nurse. Yeah. Now, something happened then that I kind of understand, but I can't put in words to explain. So in that sense, I don't understand it. I can't put it in words to explain, but part of me just understands what it's about. He said he was a student nurse, and there was this tidal wave of female voices that said, "Ah." Right? Now, I kind of know what that is, but if you said to me, write it down, there are things which we can agree that it's not. Yeah, it's not fwa. It's not that sort of noise, is it? It's a much more sentimental T than kind of desire. 2 weeks ago, it's 3:30 in the morning. Looking at my phone. I know you're not supposed to do it if you have trouble sleeping. I know that, but who cares, eh? And I came across this tweet. It's the same thing, isn't it? It's the same thing. A word adorable there, yeah? Adorable is a word you say about kittens, isn't it? You know, and that's the sort of odd erotic space that the blokes kind of occupy. Here's another odd thing that I noticed when I was in practice. I knew loads of male doctors who went out with female nurses, loads, yeah. I knew loads of male nurses who went out with female nurses, lots. Gay male nurses going out together. Female nurses and patients, saw one or two of them as well. Don't know why that isn't strike-offable, but you know, it usually ends up as a nice, warm, heartwarming story in the local press, doesn't it? Nurse marries patient. If it was a doctor, you'd be straight out, yeah. But yeah, male nurses and female doctors, don't think I knew one. Don't think I knew. But I never knew which side that came for. Were the blokes put off by their, you know, increased status, by their education? Were the female doctors put off by, you know, not a decent marriage partner? I don't know. But all I'm saying, I'm just reporting the phenomenology of it. I don't believe I ever saw one. But the main thing I want to say is that the odd thing about being a male nurse came on nurses' nights out. Yeah. Now I can spot a nurse's night out from 50 paces. Yeah, it runs like this, and I'll talk about the intensive care nurse nights out now. What you got to imagine is Tuesday nights. Doesn't matter what night nurses go out, because you know there's always someone on late or the days off the following day. It doesn't matter. So Tuesday night, 25 people, 30 people around a table in a restaurant, yeah, and 25 women, 5 fellas. Of the fellas, 2 fellas are gay, yeah. So that's the sort of and adorable. I always just get the feeling we were there as pets. And the other thing is, you would know these colleagues of yours in work, hair back, no makeup, uniform on, and yet go out and they turn into film stars. It was the oddest experience. I used to sometimes bring mates just to kind of show off. One of the other male nurses I worked with once, he said to me, "You know what? This is like a building worker's fantasy." So. And I think the things were so tight, things were so stressful in work that you'd go on a ward night out, and it'd be like sailors on 24-hour shore leave. I read a description once of the coffee room atmosphere in an intensive care unit, and it described it as having a bomber crew atmosphere, and I understood what that meant. And so you'd always, as the sort of safe bloke on these nights out, you'd always end up, Chris, from a male point of view, you'd always end up getting that sort of question. But no matter where you started your night, I offered to do an article for the Nursing Standard on nurses' nightclubs of the Northwest, and they didn't go for it. But they should have done. But there's a research proposal in it. Nurses' nightclubs of the Northwest. The ballroom of romance, where nurses went to meet police officers and firefighters. So there you were, a captive dance partner. Now, this contrasted. All of this that I've said contrasts really sharply with my experience of bringing my 2-year-old along to a play group. Yeah, the experience of going along to a play group. By now, I'm third-year student, qualified a couple of years. I'm well used to working alongside women now. There's no problem there for me. But show up to a play group and talk about isolating experience. Talk about sit over there, you weirdo. Honest to God, it was kind of really striking, the difference. Right, next thing. The Weinstein controversy. Yeah, it is a truism, or rather, it's a very commonplace thing that people say that. After the Weinstein scandal, people said all this sort of stuff. Yeah, well, it's not about sex, it's all about power. Yeah, they feel as though they can do it, and so they have a go. Yeah, this is not a sexual thing. This is about like men abusing their power. Yet I've heard this kind of, not just in that context, but in context previous to that. And while I see the possibility of that, I worked with loads and loads of powerful women, women who had control of my career or could make life unbelievably awkward for me. Yeah? And sometimes they would bully you, and sometimes they would be unfair in the off-duty and all that sort of gear. Never once did anyone get handsy. Yeah? Not just to me. I don't know anyone, any fella who ever made any complaint of that sort. And so while I do understand that power argument, I can't help but think that there's something else going on there. And the poor nurses, the nurses that I was studying with, they got it from all angles. Yeah, they were always trading stories about who's a bit familiar. Yeah, and I remember one time a stack of them came back from Newsham General Care of the Elderly Hospital. And they all had the same sort of story, so that when I saw this article published 2012, this didn't come as any shock to me, because I did the nurses I was in practice with in 1979 saying, if there's ever a fella on your ward taking Cinemet, keep arm's length from them, because they'll have a go. Yeah. The women I worked with at this time, and subsequently, they lived not just with the question of people putting hands on them. They lived with a constant background hum of fear of sexual violence. As a bloke, you had to accompany people who were going from one part of the hospital to another. People would be warned about going down dark corridors. There was constantly stories about weird things going on in the nurses' home, for instance. Constant. And I want to play you a story now. This is a quote I took on an entirely unrelated subject. Yeah. And this is about something, many of you will remember this. Yeah. This is about something which occurred in the psychology in the early 80s. And this is something I recorded 4 weeks ago or something. And first, point number one, yeah, this event or this period has stayed in her mind 40 years on. Yeah, it's not something that she's forgotten about. Point number two, she's internalized this rather unpleasant psychological response. She's internalized this to such an extent that she can have a laugh about it. Okay? I haven't asked her permission to play this, so I'm not going to tell you her name, but I bet there's a few of you would know her.
When the Yorkshire was about, and there was a rumour that he was going to go for a nursing Liverpool, and we said to Miss Lee, she was the night senior nursing officer, where I've been out to J Woods and things, hold on, Mr. Lee, only girls for attractive young ones. I was 32 at the time.
Did you get that? It was a bit indistinct. The volume was too high. Did you hear what she said? Do you all remember that? Do you all remember that business with the Yorkshire Ripper at the time? Yeah? Where that rumour started, you can only imagine, but what it spoke about was a sort of general disquiet under the surface of sort of fear of blokes. Okay, tentative conclusions, and they are tentative. First of all, I can't understand for the life of me why more men aren't nurses. I cannot understand for the life of me. All the things that took me into nursing, they are still there. And I regard nursing as being, it requires you to have all of the manly virtues, including courage. There is a person, you'll all know her, there is a person in this faculty who contracted TB off a patient. The guts it takes to walk into someone's room who's got a communicable disease, yeah, it really takes courage. That's the first thing. I can't understand why more men don't do it. If you know blokes, particularly blokes who have had a bit of time away from school, who are interested in a change of career, on my behalf, recommend nursing to them. Second, I would rather be a man in a woman's world than a woman in a man's world any day of the week. There you are. And lastly, what I did know then, I was going to say what I didn't know then, but what I learned very quickly from this group of people is that at the start of life and at the end of life, when the fancy professors have gone home and the machines that go ping have all been polished and put away, yeah, the start of life and at the end of life, these are the arms you end up in. And then and now, I find that really reassuring.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'm probably not alone in finding that really very inspiring. What I saw was the kind of momentum in the person, and what really jumped out for me was how much work there is yet to be done to get to gender equality. I think what you've highlighted is not just this kind of continued gender policing of men and of women, but I think also that some men might actually be frightened or put off by the kind of emotional work that we've actually got to do in this realm as well. So that was my thought about it, Chris. It was really inspiring. Thank you very much indeed. Absolutely brilliant. Can I open the floor for questions now?
Don't worry if you don't have any. I'm surprised that someone isn't pushing me out to ask a question. Yes?
Might be a bit of a difficult. What would you say would be the evidence that we've got gender equality in nursing? Is it 50% now? Is it the fact that...
At what point will we achieve?
Do you think?
Well, first of all, loads and loads of the senior, although there's 10% male nurses, loads and loads of the more senior jobs are taken by men. That is true, yeah. By and large, they are not jobs which I personally would go for. They may pay more, but they never strike me as being the nicest jobs. It strikes me for a lot of, the further you go up in any organisation, the less you end up doing things you like, and the more that you end up sticking around at horrible meetings. So yes, they get the better. They may well get the better paid job, and they may be overrepresented in the upper echelons. And I suppose the more women that go up that, the more at some level that represents equality. But it's not an equality that I personally would want for myself.
I wonder whether, rather than thinking in terms of strict figures, that it's got to be 50-50. Maybe the more immediate project is how do we make it appealing to men to become involved, given some of the challenges that you've highlighted. How do we get beyond appealing to the aesthetes like yourself, the more sensitive, to other kinds of men, so we can get more different kinds of men into the profession? I just wonder whether you had any ideas around that.
None whatsoever. None whatsoever. It's a mystery. It's a mystery, and I'm the wrong one to ask. I'm the wrong one to ask because I crossed the line. But for those of you, most of you are women. An interesting question to put to yourself is not how you get more men into nursing, but ask yourself personally this question: why aren't you an engineer? You know, you put in women in engineering as a search term in Google, and pages of stuff come up about we need to get more women. There's a prize, there's a special fund devoted to getting women in education. Now I'm going to say something. Perhaps James Long was right. You know, perhaps nursing is better suited to women. Perhaps engineering is better suited to men. Because the figures just aren't shifting, no matter what gets done. And here's another weird thing. And it's something to do with the name. Right? It has got something to do with the name, because it's a thin line between being a paramedic and being a nurse. It's a very thin line. But paramedics, no shortage of getting men into paramedic services, no problem whatsoever with that. Whereas the same blokes probably wouldn't see themselves as nursing as nurses. I can't understand it. It might be the name, it might be the word. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, perhaps it is the technology. Here's something I used to like to test them with. I'd be sitting in the coffee room, yeah, and here are women, and they are managing complex ventilator machines. They are managing, you know, hemofiltration systems. I mean, these are really seriously technical stuff. They're understanding whole batteries of tests, yeah. Question in the coffee room. Do you change a plug in your house? No. They just didn't see that as part of their role at all. And yet, these are expert technicians in their field. Yeah, and they can't speak. Yeah,
Absolutely vulnerable.
Yeah.
The technology was just an adjunct. It was just something that happened to be there doing the very basics.
Yeah, that's right.
And people would often associate IT with the machines, and I'd say, well, no, that's not what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that person's absolutely looked after.
Yeah. I heard a consultant in East just put the same idea in a very different way. Yeah, we were doing a ward round once, and you've got to understand that that people in intensive care, they can't speak to you. They've got a tube down their mouth, and they're asleep. They're kept asleep deliberately. Yeah, so they can't tell you. They can't say, "Oh, it hurts a bit when I do that." They can't say that to you. All you've got is the objective signs and symptoms that they display. And one of the consultants and anaesthetist on this intensive care unit said, he looked at me, he said, basically, this is veterinary medicine, isn't it? And I could kind of understand what he meant by that. You know, it was, but he wasn't a nurse. Yeah.
You know what I mean? The engineering of expectations and aspirations starts from that. And it's not a who can do, it's a who wants to do issue, in a sense. When you get the obstacles out of the way, you say, you still got a problem with recruitment. Because women can do engineering, women can do the technical stuff in nursing. Fellas, you gave the example of the paramedic, it's got a car and heroism.
You know, absolutely. Yeah. And blue lights. Nina.
It's 100 miles an hour, you can go through the lights over. So
Yeah.
there's all stuff that's kind of, in a sense, easy to understand and easy to see where the causes come from. Just a question, Chris. When, if, and so on, I didn't know, to preface the question with, I didn't really realise the extent to which male nurses do male patients.
Yeah.
Until you said it. I've never really thought about that. Being in the late 90s, I can remember going to the hospital, it was all female nurses. And
Yeah.
when you get to teenage years, freaking out a bit about the implications of that. But is it useful, apart from attending to male patients, to be of a specific gender in nursing?
Well, it wasn't entirely like that. For one thing, all intensive care units are mixed. Yeah. And the theory, I suppose the unspoken theory there is, well, you're not really there anyway, so, you know, and we will protect your privacy even when you're asleep. Yeah. That was a shock. I visited an intensive care unit in France one time, and they had no inhibition about leaving patients with no clothes on at all. It was kind of expected. I realised then what a sort of culturally conditioned inhibition this was for me. But the other place that we were thrown in at the deep end with women was in maternity care. Yeah, I saw 10 babies born as a bloke, blubbed every time. So there was that sort of stuff. Accident and emergency, for instance. It's just where people are settled. Yeah.
The increase of blokes going into nursing, developing nursing care in a useful way, per se, i.e. years ago, female nurses would do all the nursing, or the nursing would get done.
Yeah.
Of male patients as well as female
Yeah.
patients. Paradoxically, at the same time, male doctors, as opposed to female doctors, going back with fewer or few female doctors, would do all the patients, same kind of thing. So is it useful for the profession and for the distribution of skills and roles that more males enter nursing? Does it develop the profession? Or, because when people romanticize backwards to Natty Jigs, you know what I mean, thinking that was ideal nursing.
Yeah.
You didn't have the opportunity to demarcate it. Males doing male patients and females doing.
The majority of, although blokes by and large, in most cases go on male wards, yeah, the majority of the nurses are still female. So what can happen is that you get given all the sort of the heavy lifting type of me, yeah.
I didn't think you were allowed to do that these days, haven't you? You've got all hoists and winches and God knows what.
Yeah.
Lifting people.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
Just as a final point, Chris, I can relate to virtually all of the stories you told. We started in the career around the same sort of time. And certainly when I was a general student nurse, I used to remember the off-duty because I was sick of being called the male nurse on the off-duty. All of it was to female nursing all the way down. But I did the cardinal sin in 1983 when we brought the new EU syllabus in, where instead of doing the VD clinic, I actually chose to go and do midwifery. And I spent 3 months at the head end of the bed.
Me too, except I didn't have a choice. I would have loved the VD clinic. That would have been a high spot in my nursing career. I think that would have been such a laugh. But no, we all got on some sort of gender equality thing. We all got packed off to maternity hospital because and that was useful. That was useful to an extent, And I learned how to kind of wrap a baby in that sort of bizarre way that midwives do. Really tight. So that was good, but disturbing as well. They were the only complaint I ever did as a student nurse. The only complaint was on the midwifery ward, where frankly speaking, I coined the expression to myself at least, women's inhumanity to women, because it was just frightening. You're the midwife, aren't you? It was scary. Let me give you one example. There was a patient in who'd had brain surgery for epilepsy, yeah, and she'd had a cesarean section, yeah, and there she is. She's in the bed next door to sister's office because it's she's just been operated on. The door goes, and outside is her husband who's come all the way from Runcorn to see her missus who's in this specialist facility, yeah. And I go out, and he's there with his 3-year-old boy. And he says, can I bring him in? So I said, hang on a minute, I'll go and ask sister. So I went and asked sister. And I said, is it all right, Mr. So-and-so, come in, he's got his kid. And she said, no, visiting with children is Monday, Wednesdays and Fridays. Today's Tuesday, he'll have to go home. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe my ears. Sorry, mate. Getting hungry?
I'll ask you a question. I don't know if it's true, but is the uniform still such a severe discipline?
It's different to that now.
You showed here,
Yeah, it's,
threats and all that.
yeah, that's all gone. Everyone wears sort of theatre theatre stuff these days. There's a lot of theatre stuff. There's a lot of theatre stuff, and just for the ones who are nurses, here's something I can't stand. Yeah, seeing someone in an intensive care kit in Tesco's, it drives me nuts. I feel like going up to them. Well, either you're going in to work, and you know you're going to carry all this stuff that you're rubbing off onto yourself, or you've been in work already and there's snot and all sorts on that, and you're walking around Tesco's. It is pretty much these days, yeah.
And is that helpful? I expect it is. But
I'm not sure.
I work like in a different profession.
Yeah.
I could go to meetings and office work and stuff like that. You know, you couldn't turn it off, the sexuality, the gender issues, because it was in the clothes, it was in the presentation,
Yeah.
it was in the outfits, and it interfered or created.
Yeah.
It might have been fine and compatible and complementary to a good atmosphere, but there's an issue, there's a dynamic all the time.
Yeah.
And we've kind of taken that out of it.
Yeah. No, they're pretty much unisex, the uniforms these days. But it's always those of you working pre-reg. It always strikes me as weird. You go into a group of 150 students, yeah, and that there's a sort of tendency for all the blokes to flock together. Have you noticed that? They might be straight fellas, heterosexual, but they're homosocial because they like to sort of stay in groups. You know, and I can't explain that either. Why don't you spread out? It's like getting the thing in a circle. Getting the wagons in a circle, yes, self-protectively.
I have a question, if that's all right. It's the adorable thing. And I noticed on Twitter it had about 8,900 likes. So it was obviously very popular. And I just wondered whether, for female nurses, it's such a joy to work with a heterosexually identified man with whom you have a professional and platonic relationship. And they've kind of de-eroticized you, so there's no sexual threesome with it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's extraordinarily interesting experience, it is. You know, and that's why I raised the subject of the playgroup. Because all of a sudden you were out of that nice, friendly, warm atmosphere and you were back to normal. You know, they didn't know you. Who's this weirdo over there? Was he hanging around kids? It is a strange experience, and especially strange going on the nights out, because, you know.
Okay, Chris, I'm just aware that you've held court for about an hour and a half now. You must be fancying perhaps a drink and a few...
Oh, don't worry, I need to go to the toilet.
Well, perhaps something a bit stronger. Okay, can we show our appreciation to Chris?